Everyone thinks empires fall because of wars, but wars are symptoms, not causes. The true reason every empire collapses is quieter. It starts with numbers on ledgers, not cannons on battlefields. Rome didn't fall because barbarians crossed the Rhine. They crossed because Rome couldn't pay its soldiers. The Spanish Empire didn't crumble because of British ships. It drowned under interest payments to the bankers of Antwerp and Genoa. And the British Empire? It wasn't defeated by colonial revolts. It was bankrupted by its own debt, disguised behind the polished facade of the pound sterling. Every great power in history has believed the same illusion, that debt, when dressed up as progress, is not a threat but a tool, that borrowing can stretch time, extend glory, and buy the future, until the bill arrives. We like to think we're different. We have central banks now, algorithms, credit ratings. But look closer, and the pattern hasn't changed in 5,000 years. It's always the same sequence: expansion, credit, illusion, overreach, collapse, reset, rebirth. 7 cycles, repeating like tides, erasing and rebuilding civilizations. In Babylon, it began with silver loans inscribed on clay tablets. In Renaissance Florence, it was double-entry bookkeeping, a magic trick that made kings believe they were richer than they were. In London, it became the Bank of England's notes, promises to pay in gold that, eventually, couldn't be paid. And today, it's trillions of digital dollars, born out of nothing, traded by people who believe the illusion will last forever. The paradox is this: every debt system begins as a stabilizer, a way to make the economy smoother, more predictable, fairer. But over time, it becomes the very thing it was meant to prevent: instability. The bridge turns into a cliff. Why? Because money, once created as a promise, always demands to grow faster than the real world that must honor it. That's when mathematics breaks politics. Because debt compounds, but reality doesn't. Empires can command armies, laws, even gods, but they cannot command compound interest. When the curve turns exponential, the empire turns desperate. Taxes rise, wars are launched, trust evaporates. And then, just like Rome, Spain, France, Britain, the cycle restarts. If you're hearing this in 2025, remember this. We're living inside one of these cycles right now. The signs are identical: asset bubbles, rising inequality, governments printing in panic, citizens numbed by inflation they don't understand. It always feels stable right before it isn't. History doesn't repeat itself word for word, but debt does. It's the same song played in different currencies. If this opened another side of history for you, comment where you're watching from, because understanding how empires collapse isn't just history, it's a survival skill. To understand how every empire plants the seed of its own destruction, you have to look not at wars or revolutions, but at ledgers. Every collapse begins with someone writing a promise and someone else believing it. Debt, in its purest form, is time. It's the decision to take something from the future and spend it today. And every empire, from Babylon to Washington, builds its power on the illusion that the future will always be bigger than the past. Let's start where the idea was formalized, in the temples of Mesopotamia around 2400 BCE. The priests didn't just serve the gods, they served as the first central bankers. They lent grain at interest, measured in silver. When harvests failed and peasants couldn't repay, the king would periodically declare amargi, debt forgiveness, to avoid revolt. It was the first reset. Even then they knew, if the numbers grow faster than the fields, you lose both the people and the crops. Fast forward 2 millennia. In Rome, credit became the bloodstream of the empire. Senators financed wars and trade through faenus, loans at fixed interest. But when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it wasn't only political, it was financial. The Republic was suffocating under debt. Land was concentrated in the hands of creditors. Soldiers returned home to find their farms seized. Caesar's debt reforms were radical. He cut interest, canceled arrears, and in doing so made enemies of the entire creditor class. That's the hidden story of the Roman civil wars. not ideology, but insolvency. The mechanism evolved, but never changed in essence. By the 16th century, Spain had gold and silver from the New World, literal mountains of it. But what few remember is that nearly 70% of that treasure went straight to creditors in Genoa and Augsburg. The Spanish crown defaulted not once, but 6 times between 1557 and 1647. Each time, the world's richest empire was unable to pay its bills. Debt had become its invisible ruler. Then came the British. In 1694, a group of merchants and goldsmiths proposed a simple idea to King William III. They would lend him £1.2 million to fight France in exchange for a royal charter. That charter created the Bank of England, the prototype of every central bank to follow. For the first time, money became state debt, backed not by gold, but by the king's promise to tax his people forever. It was genius and poison. Because from that day on, every war, every colony, every canal or railway expansion could be financed not by savings, but by future taxes. The empire became addicted to tomorrow. That's the architecture of the modern system. A small group creates credit, ex nihilo, and lends it to governments and corporations who spend it into circulation. The public believes it's money, but it's not. It's an IOU with a timer. And the timer always runs out. Every empire that builds such a system believes it can regulate it, that it can manage the cycles. But the deeper truth is, no one manages compound interest. It manages you. The British found out when by 1815 their national debt had reached 200% of GDP. The French learned it when the assignats, paper money printed during their revolution, collapsed to 1/100th of its value in less than 5 years. And the Americans? They've been writing IOUs since 1913, the year the Federal Reserve was born. So when we talk about the 7 debt cycles, we're not talking about eras. We're talking about the repetition of one structure, the machinery that turns promises into empire and empire into ashes. It starts with innovation, grows through expansion, then feeds on illusion until reality calls its bluff. Every system that borrows from the future eventually meets the future, and the future always collects. If this made you see history's empires as one long financial experiment, tell me in the comments what empire you think we're in now. This is the most dangerous part of every cycle, the moment when everyone believes they've outsmarted history. When the books look balanced, the coins shine, and every class of society feels richer than they actually are. It's the golden illusion, the calm before mathematics takes its revenge. After the British created their debt machine in 1694, something miraculous seemed to happen. Money flowed, trade expanded, the Navy ruled the seas. London became the clearinghouse of the world. People looked at the ever-growing empire and thought, we've found the formula. Borrow, invest, expand, repeat. And for a while it worked. Debt was no longer a burden. It became fuel. The Bank of England printed paper notes against the king's debt. Merchants borrowed to build ships, and those ships brought back gold, sugar, and slaves, all taxable, all collateral. It was the first self-reinforcing loop of credit. Wealth created more debt, and debt created more apparent wealth. The same pattern repeated in every age. In the 1920s, Americans called it the New Era. In the 1980s, they called it financial innovation. Today, we call it quantitative easing. Different words, same illusion. The French tried it too. In 1790, the National Assembly decided to issue paper money called assignats, backed by confiscated church land. It seemed logical. Land was valuable, the nation was rich, and people needed liquidity. At first, everyone felt relief. Markets revived, prices stabilized, wages rose. The illusion of prosperity returned. Then the presses kept running. By 1795, a loaf of bread that cost 14 sous before the revolution cost 5,000. The government blamed speculators, hoarders, foreign conspiracies, anything but arithmetic. When the money died, the republic almost died with it. Every empire in its phase of illusion tells the same story. This time is different. The Romans said their territory was too vast to fail. The Spanish said their silver mines were infinite. The British said their trade routes made them invincible. Americans say their dollar is the world's reserve currency. And yet, the logic of compounding debt is older than every flag that flies. The illusion works because it flatters both rulers and citizens. Politicians can promise more: pensions, wars, palaces, highways, without raising visible taxes. Citizens can live beyond their means and call it growth. And bankers? They collect interest from both sides. It's a perfect triangle until trust falters. Imagine a balloon. At first, every puff of air makes it look stronger, bigger, rounder, more majestic. But the strength was never increasing, only the tension. The same with credit systems. They appear most stable right before they tear. In the 19th century, British politicians called their empire the workshop of the world. But behind the poetry, debt was rising faster than production. Each new colony, each new invention required more financing, more speculation, more leverage. From the railway manias of the 1840s to the South Sea bubble of 1720, every boom ended the same way: too much paper chasing too little reality. We still live inside that rhythm. When central banks promise stability, they mean illusion, an economy floating on borrowed time. As long as people believe the promises, the system grows. The moment they doubt, it implodes. So the phase of illusion isn't just a financial trick, it's a psychological one. The collective hypnosis of a civilization convinced that credit is the same as wealth. It's the most seductive lie in human history. Because for a while, it feels true. And when it feels most true, that's when the fall begins. If this made you recognize that what we call growth might just be leverage in disguise, write, "I see the pattern," in the comments. There's a moment, always the same, when the illusion stops working. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, like a crack in glass. A missed payment, a failed auction, a rumor in the marketplace. Then, within months, what looked like infinite prosperity reveals itself for what it was: debt disguised as growth. When the British pound broke its promise to gold in 1931, the empire had already collapsed in secret. It just took one generation for the illusion to die in public. The same had happened before, in 1720 with the South Sea bubble, in 1825 with the Latin American loan mania, in 1890 with the Bering crisis. Every time the pattern was identical: easy credit, speculative euphoria, sudden doubt, then panic. Arithmetic always wins. In France, 1795 was not just a year of inflation. It was the moment faith in paper itself vanished. Merchants refused assignats even for food. Soldiers demanded payment in metal. Markets froze, and the government resorted to repression: price controls, confiscations, executions. When money dies, law follows. And when law dies, so does the state. In Spain, the cycle was even slower but deadlier. By the 17th century, the crown owed more to its bankers than it could ever repay. Half the empire's silver went directly from Seville's docks to Genoese creditors. Inflation hollowed out the middle class, trade stagnated, and industry fled to places with real credit, like Amsterdam and London. That's how Spain lost its empire, not on battlefields, but on balance sheets. And then there's Rome, the eternal warning. When emperors debased the denarius, adding more copper to silver, they didn't just change coins, they changed trust. The army demanded more pay, taxes rose, and provinces revolted. By the 3rd century, Roman currency had lost 98% of its silver content. The empire survived another 100 years, but only as a shell. Because when money collapses, everything else only pretends to function. It's always the same movie. Debt piles up faster than real output. Politicians assure the public that everything is under control. Then someone asks for real payment. Gold, wheat, oil, dollars. And the system shatters. Banks close, trade halts, governments panic. They print more to save the economy, and that accelerates the fall. In the modern era, the scene is familiar. 2008 was just a soft rehearsal. One domino in a long chain stretching back centuries. Mortgages replaced colonies, derivatives replaced railways, central banks replaced kings. But the math didn't change. When debt compounds faster than income, collapse is not a question of if, only when. Look at the headlines of any empire before its fall. Temporary liquidity issue, short-term volatility, strong fundamentals. They all said the same thing, right before they vanished. Because the truth is, no empire has ever been defeated from outside before it collapsed within. No enemy could destroy what mathematics already condemned. The sword is never the first cause, it's the final collector. Collapse is not chaos, it's accounting. The moment when promises return home and find no one there to redeem them. If you feel that same tension today, that sense that numbers no longer connect to reality, you're not imagining it. You're watching the same story unfold again in digital form. The debt is global now, and the illusion is algorithmic. But the laws of compounding haven't changed since Babylon, and when those laws finally call the bluff, the fall will be just as quiet and just as total. When the dust settles, history always tells the same comforting lie. We've learned our lesson. But we haven't. We've only changed the stage. The props are new, bonds instead of coins, screens instead of ledgers, but the plot is identical. After each collapse, a new generation builds the same system, convinced they can control it this time. They call it innovation. In the 19th century, it was industrial capitalism. In the 20th, central banking and fiat money. In the 21st, quantitative easing, derivatives, and digital currencies. But all of them orbit the same sun: debt. When the United States replaced Britain as the world's creditor after 1945, it inherited not just global power, but the full mechanics of the imperial debt system. The dollar became the new gold, but without the discipline of gold. Under the Bretton Woods Agreement, every dollar was as good as gold, until 1971, when Nixon quietly ended the convertibility. It was the modern equivalent of Rome debasing the denarius. From that moment, money became a story backed only by trust and military power. And yet it worked, at first. The illusion of infinite credit revived growth. The 1980s brought deregulation and leverage. The 1990s brought globalization, cheaper labor abroad, higher profits at home. It was the same old expansion phase wearing a new suit. The empire of debt was now global, not confined to one country, but woven into the DNA of the entire financial system. When the 2008 crisis hit, the old pattern flickered into view for a moment. We saw the mathematics. Banks were insolvent, governments panicked, and trillions were printed overnight to, quote, restore confidence. That was not a fix, it was a reset button. Instead of purging the system, they expanded it. They took the pain of one debt cycle and spread it across the entire world. The illusion survived, at the cost of making the next collapse systemic. By 2025, global debt has surpassed $350 trillion, more than 3 times the planet's GDP. No empire in history has carried such a load, and yet markets celebrate every new trillion as progress. We call it stimulus, liquidity, monetary support, but these are just new words for the same act, borrowing from a future that may never arrive. The same mechanism now plays out not between nations, but within societies. Governments borrow to fund consumption, corporations borrow to buy back their own stock, households borrow to survive inflation created by, you guessed it, too much borrowing. Debt has become oxygen. Cut it off and the system suffocates. Feed it and the pressure grows. In past empires, creditors were visible: bankers, merchants, kings. Today they're algorithms, pension funds, shadow institutions. Power has gone invisible again, just like it was in Babylon, hidden behind contracts and screens, above the reach of voters, beyond the understanding of most citizens. The cycle has evolved into something global, digital, and psychological. Trust is the new gold standard, and it's melting. Every inflation spike, every bailout, every new currency experiment erodes the collective faith that tomorrow will redeem today's promises. That's how every collapse begins, not with panic, but with quiet disbelief. Rome had debased silver. We've debased truth. Our currencies still function, but their meaning has been hollowed out. A dollar, a euro, a yen, they're all promises that the future will keep up with the past. But history whispers otherwise. The same cycle that buried empires is now planetary. No new territory to plunder, no new world to discover. Only new layers of credit stacked upon old ones. And as before, the numbers are outgrowing the real world. The math is patient. It waits. Because when promises exceed what reality can deliver, correction is not punishment. It's balance. If this part made you realize we're already living through the next global reset, write in the comments, system. Every empire thinks it's unique, that its collapse will be different. But history has no favorites. The laws of money are as unforgiving as gravity. Once trust is gone, the fall is absolute. Look back over 5,000 years and you'll see one long pattern written in different alphabets. Sumerian tablets, Roman coins, French assignats, British gilts, American treasuries. Different symbols, same meaning. A promise to repay what cannot be repaid. And every time the reckoning came not from rebellion or invasion, but from arithmetic. Empires never die of bad intentions. They die of good intentions carried too far. Generosity funded by borrowing. Wars justified as temporary. Growth demanded by voters who forget that every miracle comes with interest. When numbers outgrow reality, reality retaliates. The collapse is never sudden. It feels like normal life until the day it doesn't. Markets still trade, politicians still smile, central bankers still speak of soft landings. Then, overnight, what was once wealth becomes data, and data becomes dust. The crowd stares in disbelief, asking, how could this happen? But it always happens. It's the seventh stage of the cycle, the return to zero, the purge that makes way for the next beginning. Because here's the hidden symmetry. Every collapse is also a cleansing. When the debts are wiped, creativity returns. When illusions die, reality can grow again. The soil of ruin is the seedbed of renewal. That's why Babylon rose after Sumer, Rome after Greece, Britain after Spain, and why something new will rise after us. But only if we understand the pattern. If you're hearing this in 2025, you're living at the edge of a cycle that's been repeating since the dawn of money. The question isn't whether it ends, it's how we choose to face the ending. With denial, as every empire before us, or with clarity, knowing that wealth built on promises must someday return to the real world, land, labor, and trust. Arithmetic doesn't forgive, but it does reset. And in that reset lies the chance to build something honest again. Not another illusion of endless credit, but a system rooted in real value, human, tangible, finite. Empires collapse when their numbers stop matching their truths. Ours will be no exception, unless we learn to count differently. If this opened your eyes to how history keeps its own books, share it, because the next empire isn't written yet. And this time, maybe, we can make the math serve the people, not the other way around.